Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining me again at the round table. I'm here with Emil, Kostas, Joshua, and Riccardo. We were just having a question with Kostas, which is, do you think AI will replace humans in fashion? Back to
To be
you.
honest with you, I've got a straight answer. I don't think that is the case. I mean, some of the more interesting things that we've seen with, let's say, for example, generative adversarial networks, is that you can use AI to copy the style of a painter, for example, right? I mean, you can even use AI to copy the style of music, but it's always about copying. Now, what's to say that you can't generate new things? And we've definitely seen companies experimenting with that. I think it was Google potentially with H&M that were trying something like that, where AI was generating completely new pieces of clothing. And I think that's very interesting. But I'd see it more as something that's augmenting human creativity, and it's helping designers maybe imagine new things and create new looks. But really, when it comes to fashion, it is so much more than just creating a new outfit. It's very much about who wears that outfit and who wears
Mhm.
that piece of clothing, and what marketing are you doing around it, and all of that play a key role in how we get inspired by a piece, and how something gets trending. So I don't think it's as simple as AI replacing humans in that. It's very much about enhancing our abilities and the role that it will play, whether that's when you're generating new fashion, when you're styling fashion, in the supply chain or managing operations. That role will increase, and it will be more more key in everything that we do. But I don't think it's a matter of replacement.
Mhm. I hear you. That's an interesting insight for sure. We have Emil back as well, so let's see if your mic is working.
Mic check, 1 2 1 2.
Mic check, accepted.
Perfect.
We can hear you. Cool. So the question was for you, the question before was tech can often be seen as separating people, but what you're trying to do is actually enhance connection and kind of forward the human aspect. So I was just wanting to ask what you do to kind of mitigate and try to have this opposite effect.
Sure. I think it's more about, I think that the potential is so big, but that we sometimes forget about it or overlook it, because in the beginning, technology, as I said in the talk, was very much left with technologists and people who could code and were focusing on that type of progress. But now, we all have one of these in our pockets and something on our wrist, and technology is everywhere, and it's affecting elections, it's affecting all of our relationships. So it's about saying that instead of looking at technology as something that can progress technology to be faster and smarter, we can actually look at it as something that can progress humanity. So I think we should all get involved, no matter what your background is, because technology is affecting everything. So if you're I even saw that like priests are starting to have, AI bots where you can pray with them. So I think it's just a matter of everyone getting involved and looking at not just are we progressing because we can, but why are we doing it? Can we help it push us towards a future that might be a little bit more inclusive or greener or kinder as well, instead of just faster and smarter?
Nice. I love this positive outlook for sure because I feel like there's a lot of views out there that are just kind of making tech seem like this like evil thing. But I love this kind of positive, happy outlook. So yeah, I guess moving on from this towards to Joshua. You were talking about onboarding team members, but today obviously like there's so much online and remote work. So the question is, has this onboarding process changed, and is the tech like good enough to kind of help with this, if that makes sense?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. And, short answer, everything has changed with
Yeah.
going fully remote. A lot of startups, especially at a smaller scale, you can get away with having no formal onboarding and just parking someone next to an experienced person and saying, okay, learn everything they know, and in a few weeks we'll get you started, and that can kind of work. But as you get bigger and at a global scale, onboarding is critical and it's very formal, and you have a lot of documentation, things to review, and maybe even training classes. Which fortunately, as we see with what we're doing right now, it's actually very easy to deliver effective training remotely. The parts that I find that are a little more challenging are the things around the smaller issues, right? So you can teach a lot of stuff remotely. We even have great tools for pair programming and working together, but I still find it vital to have, we use a buddy system, and the difference now is you have a Slack buddy. Right. So those first few weeks, you have somebody you know can answer your question, help you find a resource, whatever. And it's now more important than ever that that person is proactive. Right. Because whereas before they kind of look across the room, look you in the eye, see if you need anything. Now, if they don't check in with you, it can feel really lonely. So the bigger change we've made, not only just moving things online, but also being really proactive from our side to check in multiple times a day, make sure things are progressing, make sure needs are met, stuff like that.
Sure.
But I think it's totally possible.
Cool. I just want to have a question to the audience. We can have questions from the audience as well. It's not just me asking you guys. So if you guys have any questions, please just type in the Q&A tab and we'll try to get to it. Hopefully get to it. There's actually 2 questions already. So Joshua, actually, what is that barcode behind you?
Well, you're going to have to hold your phone up to the screen and scan it. Now, it says hello world, actually. It's from I was doing a development project very briefly, trying to get an inexpensive camera to recognize and read barcodes as part of a project I was working on. And the camera was so cheap that this was the smallest barcode it could read accurately. And just to show you, it's not small at all. It's almost as big as my phone. So, yeah. So I just hung it up there as a funny reminder.
Nice, that's really cool. I love that. Let's see, thank you. We also have another question. So we're for Riccardo, which is perfect. So we asked a question from our team, which is, what typeface would you name like the most influential in the last century? It's kind of similar to the one I wanted to ask, is which is your favorite one? So you can answer both.
So I think one of the most important developments of the last century that kind of dragged into this century and really revealed its impact only into this century is the use of sans serif typefaces, which basically didn't quite resurface in typographic history in the West, let's say, until the early 1800s. First from architectural lettering, and then they made it into the work of typeface designers around 1810s, 1820s. But I'm taking it a bit far away. But basically, through a typeface called Accidents Grotesque, it kind of the model of the grotesque letters, a certain style of sans serif letters, which is a 1800s kind of model, made it into the 1900s, the last century, through, I would say, to answer the question, perhaps Helvetica is the most influential typeface in the second half of the century. Futura, starting 3 decades earlier. So I guess it's a bit of there's a number of typefaces building on each other's shoulders, leading us up to where we are now, which is that sans serif typefaces are used everywhere. If you open the BBC app, you will see a sans typeface used for text. Just one last thing, the reason why these typefaces are called grotesque is that they were perceived as grotesque in the 1800s, as weird, as strange. By now, we read the news on our phones in those typefaces, and I think, that's my answer. My favorite typeface, I don't know. As of now,
a bit of a mean question.
After all these years, I don't really have a ready-made answer. I think it depends on the purpose. It depends. It's a bit like choosing a piece of outfit, like Kostas was saying. It depends on the occasion, right? So it depends what I need to use it for. So, yeah.
Well, I was going to say, isn't it from how you're describing typefaces across the years? It sounds a little bit like fashion, right? Just kind of building on each other and moving on and creating something new.
Completely. And you have you also have there was a question before in the in the chat, which was about what do you look at when you buy some clothing, quality, design, price, and these are all things that apply to typefaces as well. There is definitely trends, but there is a strong functionality component which is there in clothing as well, but in type is absolutely paramount. You can't read if it's not functional. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, thank you. Actually, do you guys have any questions for each other? I think this is the first time you're properly meeting each other as well. So, and I think at least some of you watched the other talk. So if you have any questions for.
I've got another one for Riccardo and typefaces. So in fashion, you have like how trends are created. It's an interesting combination of actually fabric mills, because the fabric mills all need to coordinate on what fabrics they're going to produce for the year. Then the designers all buy from that. Then they coordinate between them based on that, what the colors are going to be for the season. And then that effectively gets pushed down to the audience. And, there's a question of how much of it is pushed down versus how much of it is created on social media versus actual preferences. And, I think there's a bit of both, but really a lot of it is pushed top down. How are trends created in typefaces?
The technology is a great driving factor. If you think of what I was showing in my session, these variable fonts that stretch and kind of animated. Now, if you open an Instagram account of any Type Foundry or Type Design Studio, you see many of those because we can do it, so we do it. It reminds me of the 1960s and 70s when photo composition was introduced. For the first time in history, type was not made of pieces of metal, let's say, but it was on film. So you could go beyond the borders, the limits of individual characters, and space them very tightly. And suddenly all advertisements would have these very tightly spaced titles, which is typical of that age. If you see one, you'll immediately recognize what I mean. Why? Because finally mankind could do it. They were freed of that physical constraint. And now with variable fonts, we are freed of the static constraint of fonts. They can move. So that's one factor. And then, it's a long topic, but, you have big players like Google, for instance, with Google Web Fonts. I think they have had an impact in kind of influencing trends from the top down in a way. I think it's a fine line, but I like to think that it's generated by use. What I was saying, that the focus should be the user. So I think trends are generated by what people need. So graphic designers and yeah.
That makes sense. I never thought of it as a way, as technology influencing it that much, but what you're saying makes a lot of sense.
But it must be the same with fashion as well, right? Meaning, I'm guessing it's not my field, but I guess what you can make in terms of fabrics, somehow, innovations bring about new trends.
There's certainly, fashion technology going on a lot. I mean, you see a lot of sort of technical fabrics that are more about the usability of the actual fabric being used in sports or hiking when or workwear, when there is a specific application for that kind of technology. I think what we see more with kind of mainstream fashion is probably the use of sustainable garments. I think we see a lot more waterproof garments coming in now. But I would probably say, at least according to my view, that technology probably plays a smaller role in how the seasons and the fashion trends change.
Actually, Kostas, I have a question for you. A year and a half ago, we did a project with digital clothing for a Swedish brand called Carlings, where we created a collection that you can only wear digitally and then post it on Facebook and Instagram as a way of people could consume without the footprint of more clothes. What is your take on digital clothing and that whole thing?
I mean, that's a very good question, right? And I think that ties into what we were saying before around, okay, does technology influence actually what happens with the trends? And I think this is catching up more and more and more. I mean, we see games where you can dress your virtual avatar and you can actually buy, probably not the same price you'd buy them in a physical world, but quite expensive, I'd say, for a digital garment that doesn't exist. But I think the jury's open on what's going to happen there. I think, as people use social media more and more, we do have the need of expressing, ourselves in a digital-only manner. And that's better for the planet as well, because you don't need to take something, wear it once, and then throw it away. And, I think that the pandemic plays an interesting kind of role here, because we're all suddenly sitting in our living rooms with our pajamas on and our active wear, and there's a question of how do I express myself if I'm not going out, and what do I do on social media? And I think digital clothing like that is a great answer. So that's one way of looking at it. But where I think is the real potential for innovation.
I can just interrupt a little bit. We have I'm getting notes that we need to wrap it up soon, so we have maybe a couple more. Just a little bit.
Quick point.
Of course.
One of the big transformations that we've seen in a lot of industries, like cinema, for example, is the digitalization of the supply chain. And right now, we're not seeing that in fashion, which means that it's very inefficient for us to produce some clothes and then, from the time that you actually produce the design to when you get it live to customers, it might be 2 years, 2 entire years. And I think the real innovation with that digital clothing is the ability to digitize the entire chain and respond to trends a lot quicker, and even on-demand clothing.
Oh, interesting. Thank you. I'm happy it turned into a little bit of a discussion as well. It wasn't just me asking you guys questions, so that's great. But yeah, thanks so much. I really wanted to ask a last question, maybe just if you can just say in like 1 or 2 words, but because you guys all come from like different backgrounds, but where do you find, like, what is your inspirational process? Where do you find inspiration? Just like a couple words, literally. You have 1 sentence each.
Go first,
Sure.
perhaps. I just wanted to say, for me, it's traveling. As banal as it may sound and cliche, but it's really about getting yourself out there, going to different places, look at the vernacular letters that you have in the streets of different countries. There is a huge difference, when you go to a country or another country, or a continent and another continent. And I think that is my inspiration, which means that, as you can guess, I've been struggling quite a bit this year, and I'm looking forward to when we can move around a bit more again.
Cool. And the rest?
I'd say I'll go on the opposite scale, and I'll say everyday life frustrations. When you kind of get out there and you're like, this thing is really annoying. Is there a way that I can solve it and make my life and everyone's life better?
Cool. Yeah, for me, it's often I'm stuck with a problem, and I've spent a ton of time researching and pouring as much knowledge into my head about it as I can, and I know inspiration comes from anywhere. And I've learned that that I need to find a moment that is completely disconnected from the problem, whether that's doing the dishes or taking a shower, whatever it is, and somehow that lets that information sort of process in a different way, and then boop, the light comes on, and then you have to hurry and write down real quick what you realized. But for me, it's making that conscious choice of saying, okay, I'm going to go in the garden and poke around for a little bit, and hopefully my mind will get there. And luckily, it usually does.
I'm gonna be annoying and say everywhere, but I feel like it's like when people, their phones are listening to them, and because they said something, now they see it everywhere. I feel like if I'm working on something, all of a sudden I see inspiration everywhere. Like, I think it's a matter of tuning your mind into, let's say you're working on a AI voice project, all of a sudden everything could be inspiration for that. So I think it's much more about like tuning in what you're searching for, and then you'll find inspiration in lots of weird places.
Cool. Thanks so much. This was some really cool insight. We actually have 1 more question in the chat room. The audience is really loving you, Kostas. So the question is, do you plan on extending the digital clothing project and making more of it? This is the question. So you have to give you a couple seconds.
We're certainly, you know, we started actually with a mobile app that allows you to style your own clothes, right? And then we moved into the kind of retail space, helping retailers. So we have plans in two directions. One, certainly more countries and working with more retailers worldwide, but really the bigger vision is being able to style your own clothes anywhere you are, and having your own personal stylist, you know, following you with you, like, you know, your Alexa or your Siri, but a lot more fashionable. So that's what we'd like to get to.
Amazing, thank you. So yeah, I think this is all we have time for. Again, thanks everyone for joining me, and I hope you all stay around for the second part as well.